was created to mark to commemorate the Nakba on the 15th of May, of course. After that, it then went to Edinburgh, Beirut, and now here it is in Amman. Poland. I've been working with these theatre companies, and on 3 occasions I went to visit a concentration camp, a Nazi concentration camp called Majdanek, which was next to this city where I was working. This last visit was in 2004. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about this concentration camp. It's between 1942 to 1944, this mass extermination took place in here. Over 200,000 people were murdered in this camp. 40% of them were Jewish. The others, there were 35% Poles and many, many other nationalities from all over the world. Ukrainians, Russians, Germans, Austrians. When this camp is quite unusual, although it's similar to Auschwitz, which I'm sure many of you have all heard about, because people do not visit it. But nonetheless, in this camp, all the evidence of the Nazi atrocities were there. Mountains of hair, spectacles, clothes, hundreds and thousands of pairs of shoes, which I'll talk about in a minute, and also the ashes of the burnt bodies, the incinerated ashes, mountains and mountains of these ashes. So the experience inside this camp was particularly chilling, and even more chilling because nobody visits it. I was alone every time I went to this camp, so you can imagine the kind of atmosphere there. These are the rooms for these notorious gas chambers, and on the bottom right side you can actually see the canisters, the original canisters of Zyklone B, which was used, the agent which was used to gas the inmates. They would go into this room here, and they were told they were going to have a shower, but of course they weren't, they were gassed. Inside here, these are the dormitories. Everything is still tacked almost exactly as it was. Here are the ovens. These are extraordinary customized ovens, especially created to get as much efficiency as possible, because you can imagine when you've got so many hundreds of thousands of bodies to burn, you've got to have very efficient burning facility. And you can still smell the charred skin even after 64, 65 years. It's the hundreds and thousands of pairs of shoes which I was particularly interested in. As a theatre designer, years earlier, I designed a production in Athens, and I chose to have a sea of shoes in which the audience who were following the actors, it was a promenade production, would walk through this room with all of these shoes. So I've had a particular interest in the shoe as an object, as an art object, basically. These are the shoes that were found when they first arrived at the camp. Here, you can't see it so well here because it's a bit bright in here, but here you have got rows and rows of these high columns of shoes. And the shoes are extraordinary because they've got stuck in a time warp. You know, it ended in about 44. And so you've got these dated shoes, and you can tell you've got every kind of shoe from those in the high society to those at the lowest, to those of children. And of course you start to think, you know, what were they doing when they wore these shoes? Have they been stripped off in the squares, etc., etc.? So all of these stories come flooding back into your mind about shoes. Also, I think it's interesting that this was long before I ever imagined I was going to do anything with this wax figure, but already I was interested in a multiple component, in a component whereby there are hundreds of thousands. So when I saw all of these shoes, even though the subject was so horrendous, of course as an artist I was incredibly excited by seeing all of these hundreds of thousands of pairs of shoes in one place. Now, on this last occasion, I went 3 times here, and on the last occasion I went there, I was not alone. I bumped into a group of Israeli pilgrims. And of course I felt great sympathy, great empathy, because I bumped into them in the room where they were, in the incineration room where they burnt the bodies. And I imagined, supposing this was my grandmother in this room, supposing this was a parent of mine here. So afterwards they left, and then when I left, they had planted these little blue and white Israeli flags outside. And when I saw the image of the flags on the grass, I was kind of shocked, I was taken aback. And then I started to think about this flag. And for me, the flag, it's a blood-drenched flag. It's a flag which is synonymous with war crimes and the breaking of United Nations resolutions and endless wars in the region and a land theft and everything that you know much better than I know. And the flag, then I started to be very angry by seeing this flag there. And I was wondering, what are you saying by planting this flag? Are you saying that no matter what atrocity has been committed in the name of this flag, this is acceptable because of what has happened to us here in Majdanek? But this correlation is totally unacceptable. So on the one hand I was angry, and on the other hand I was becoming very confused because I had been grieving with these people. So how come now I was actually so angered by this sight of the flag? So with so much confusion in my mind, I then decided, because this actually became this terrible clash, this terrible contradiction. On the one hand, the Israeli flag, symbol of survival, and on the other hand, the freeing of Palestine. So I decided at that point that I had to do a project. I didn't know what project, but it was a project that required a lot of research, because then maybe I could find some truths, some answers. And that research began with the flag and then took me into the Palestinian Nakba of 1948. And I had no idea, first of all, I had never come across this word. I didn't know this term, catastrophe. I didn't know that there was such a catastrophe. I certainly didn't know that nearly 750,000, maybe more, up to 1 million, indigenous Palestinians were forced to flee their land. So these were the images that I was studying of this mass forced exodus. And then through this research, then of course I was starting off from these first early refugee camps, and then I moved with my research and then with my journey, I moved from the history books and into real camps. And this was much later on. This was 3 years later after my beginning. I started my research, and these are photographs that I took. This is in Badawi. I took it earlier this year in February, of the hundreds of refugees that had poured in from Darat. This is a photograph of Darat on the right in North Lebanon. So the UNRWA school where I was taking these photographs were full of Palestinian refugees. And of course many of them, they're still displaced, and this camp was totally destroyed. And it was after working with students from Badawi that my own journey came full circle, and I discovered, of course, that I had started out in 1948, but I had found another Nakba, and this was me witnessing another Nakba. And then I came to the realization of this terrible situation for Palestinians over 60 years, that Palestinians are going from one Nakba to another Nakba to another Nakba. What I found so extraordinary was that this child that I photographed in Badawi looked so much like a photograph that I was using in my research. And so this for me became a symbol of the fact that there has been no change for over 60 years. Then again, I started to play with to find these forms. Here is the formation of the exodus from the Nakba, and then here, of course, is the exodus from Darat leaving the camp last year. So again, you've got these exact replicas. And here we have photographs. Now these photographs, that if the Lebanese government and the army was everywhere, if they had caught me smuggling in my camera, then I would have gone straight to prison, and no British ambassador would have got me out. It is a massive cover-up by the Lebanese government, what happened in Darat. And even though it did go out in the media earlier on, then they started to really stop journalists going in, stop people taking photographs. So I took great risks to take the photographs. And this, of course, is it. This is Darat in the air. This is actually a Lebanese army photograph. I don't know how I got it, but I got it, and somebody gave it to me. And this is the reality of Darat, and it is a total disgrace the way that they have got away with it. Now, to go back into the project. So very early on, I knew I wanted to do something, but I didn't know how. And I think this is interesting for all of you as art students and as designers, because what happens very often is that you want to do something, you have an idea, you're desperately searching for clues, you're trying to find a way into something, and you can't find a way in, and then things happen really unexpectedly. And this is what I mean by being on your journey and always waiting for that moment when something unexpected is going to come, and then if it does come, then to really make sure you use it. And I happened to be watching a film at the Palestinian Film Festival, and then in this film there was a lady, she keeps on having these dreams, and then in one of the dreams that she has, she dreams that she sees Palestinians being hung from laundry lines, endless laundry lines, like clothes. And she says, the poor people, why are they doing this to the poor people? And then a voice says to her in her head, because they are Palestinians. That way they are kept in this state of suspension. They can neither touch heaven and they can't touch earth. And for me, that immediately summed up this situation for all Palestinians, whether they're Palestinian diaspora or Palestinians in camps or Palestinians in the West Bank. All Palestinians, because the state, the land has been removed from them, they are now kept in this perpetual state of purgatory, the space between heaven and hell, basically, where no one really knows what's going to happen to them or to their future. So this became the absolute crux for the entire concept of the piece. And then on another occasion, I wanted to have figures suspended. I didn't know what figure. And then I was playing with wax, and I was boiling wax, and I was putting all sorts of things into boiling wax, experimenting with materials. And then I put in this little figure, and I started to dip her. And the more times I dipped her, she started to change shape completely from the original form. And then this figure grew, and I found her so powerful and so emotive that she spoke to me, as happens to artists. And I had this real instinct that this was going to be part of it. I started to make more figures, they started to multiply, and then when I started putting them all together, I found...
Oh, sorry.
Don't tell me.
What's inside the wax?
Okay, I'll come to that, but it's wire and paper, but I promise I'm going to come to that. So the more figures I made, I found that it started to make an impact. Then I started doing this drawing. Supposing I had crowds of these figures, how would it be? Then a bit of photoshopping, it was multiplying it, and you can see, even this was long before I had any idea I was going to make this piece, but you can see now already how this relates to the actual piece that we have upstairs. And then I wanted to brainstorm this idea of suspension, because this dream was so powerful, so important. So I put the wax into a tank, a glass tank of water. Of course, wax will float. Then I weighed them down, and then I started to play with light and with inks. Again, you can't really see, it's better on the screen here because the colours are very important. So with a lot of light and inks, and then I found I could get extraordinary effects. And this has actually become another piece of work that's not shown here. But this is actually like a slow-moving, it's not an animation, it's a slow-moving film. It's in real time, and you have light and the inks are all changing, and it's changing from dark to light, basically. Yeah, it's become like another form. It's it's literally a slow-moving painting, so it has to be projected or shown in that way. But this was just quite simply to find this idea of suspension. And then I wanted to develop the work and to make it more sculptural. And this is my first image in a model box. And then this was the first figures that I started to create and to actually suspend, and the drawing. And this drawing is actually pretty close to what we have, in fact, even though it was long before I had started it. Now, workshops. I made the decision, okay, I need to have thousands of figures. I could stay in my London flat and create thousands of figures, it would take forever, I could. But then, of course, there was actually no point, because I thought, what am I trying to do here? I don't want to create a factory, set up and produce endless figures, they're meaningless. The figure, it has to carry the weight, it has to have credibility. So I decided, okay, I'm going to get Palestinians to make the figures. And then when they're making the figures, they're going to be thinking, or they're going to be doing the research around their families, so that when they create a figure, maybe they're going to give that figure a name and a place from where they came in 1948. So the figure then, it's given its soul, it's given its character. So in order to do that then, I had to, okay, how am I going to get Palestinians to make thousands of figures? So I had to devise a workshop program. And the workshop program, because I was going to be working with Palestinians in camps and also with young artists and all kinds of people, So some would have skills and others would have no skills at all. So again, I had to create a workshop to try and ensure that everybody somehow could create a figure. And that's why if you look very closely, you've got some very, very finely made figures, and you've got some which are very clumsy. But in the end, when you put them en masse, it doesn't matter. So we started off with anatomy and proportion. We also started off with physical exercises, because I'm a theatre practitioner. I work in theatre, of course, so I'm working with actors and with movement and whatever. And I believe if you really want to understand something in order to draw it, you've really got to feel it and to physically feel it. So we did a lot of exercises which related to the anatomy, which related to our skeletal form. Then these are workshops in different places. So again, this is a very important part of my personal journey. And don't forget, I had never been to Palestine. I had only read a great deal about it by this time. But I'd never had this experience of being there, certainly not being inside the West Bank. And then, of course, feeling what it was to be under an occupation, someone else's occupation, but under occupation, because I too was under the Israeli occupation when I was living in the West Bank. These are the group of young artists, many of them professional, that I trained up initially, and then together we went into the camps in the West Bank to train up and to teach, to pass on the methodology to the students. This is in Kalandia camp, for example, and this is in the Doha Centre in Bethlehem, just out of Dheisheh. So many of these people are actually from Dheisheh. And here you've got older craftspeople and whatever who might be doing embroidery, but then they got involved in making this. So you're working with a great many people. And of course, all of them with stories, their own personal stories, stories of their family. Here in Jerusalem, and here you can see the anatomy classes. We did these life-size skeletal drawings to really understand before we then reduce right down to the miniature version. Physical exercises, and then in Zarqa camp here in Jordan. This was the one camp that I stayed with here in Jordan. And then in Lebanon, I moved to Lebanon and went to Al-Bas down in the south. A very, very different experience for me working in Lebanon, because the situation there in the camps is really horrendous. I mean, really shocking. It was very shocking for me as an outsider coming into that and staying, living, with families in the camp. This is some of the photographs again that I took from the UNRWA school where the refugees were living from Nahal Bared. And there are many people living in tiny, tiny rooms there. In Burj Barajni, and Burj Barajni is fascinating in a very dark way. But then again, as an artist, one gets terribly excited by the textures, by the lines there, by the electric lines there. Total chaos, and also very dangerous, because a lot of these lines they are electrified, and when there are rainstorms in the winter, whatever, people do get killed there. Terrible. And also sewage, a lot of sewage in the streets, and the conditions are really appalling. So again, as I've mentioned before, it was very important for me to have this, to have the identity, and I created a 12-question questionnaire, which you can see up there, of course. And those questions related directly to the moment of departure on that day when the person left their home. And the questions related to very detailed information. What clothes did you wear on the day of departure? What could you carry with you? Many people carried nothing, they just took their key, of course. Did you have to help somebody? Were you carrying a child? So all of these answers, of course, then are imbued in the actual sculpture, and that's, of course, what you can see there. Sometimes you might see a little figure and she's a pregnant woman, and that's because, my grandmum was actually pregnant with my uncle and at the time, and so, of course, that detail has then gone into the figure. This is the drawing, the first drawing that I did for the idea, and you can see it now up there. This is setting it up in Al-Hosh in Jerusalem. And these are I've done a lot of film footage. I did a lot of filming of the interviews that I did, and these are some of the images from the interviews. This is in Badawi in Lebanon. It's a very powerful image, this image, extraordinary. You're almost holding the key and you've got the one tear. Many, many stories, and again, for me, quite extraordinary to then. In fact, I realised that I was starting to become like a tear collector, because what would happen, I don't know why, somehow, with me as a foreigner, I'm not sure, but somehow I invited them to open up and to relive their memories and to relive their stories, and then inevitably after about 5 minutes of the interview, many of these older people would start to cry. And at the beginning this was very shocking for me, and then I started to become quite hardened, as I believe journalists might do. But in the beginning I found it very difficult, and I mean to this day it has just given me even more fuel to continue with this project and to get it into the West, because I was so shocked by the stories that these people were telling, and so shocked that the rest of the world is not listening, and we are ignoring this completely. Then again, as part of my experience and experience living in the West Bank, I was working with many people from Ramallah and from the West Bank, as I told you. Those people do not have Jerusalem passes, therefore they were unable to come to the opening event in Al-Rosh because they are forbidden to go into Jerusalem, even though Ramallah is of course about 15 kilometers away or something, next door. But they are forbidden to come down. So then I thought, well, to hell with this. I'm going to then take the art onto a public space. Now, what we have there, of course, is that the Israelis have given us the most fantastic concrete canvases in the wall. And then I had this idea, and I thought, wow, it would be absolutely amazing to use the wall as the biggest billboard in the world, and to have hundreds of these life-size Nakba silhouettes walking through the wall. Great idea. Not so easy, of course, to carry out, but it could have been an absolutely phenomenal idea. It could have been. However, we did get started. I was living in Ram, directly behind the wall, so it was a wonderful inspiration for me, this wall. It also gave me many nightmares. And I was living in a building that now has been virtually evacuated because most of the people left with their Jerusalem IDs onto the other side to go to Jerusalem. So there was just me, and on the 7th floor, and on the bottom floor there was still the doctor's family that remained there. Being on the 7th floor, I could nip up onto the roof and I could spy on the Israelis on the other side of the wall, because there was an Israeli compound. So I knew exactly where their towers were with their automatic rifles. If any child or anybody tries to climb up that wall, the automatic rifle will fire and they will kill them. In fact, 2 children have already been killed on the top of that wall for climbing up it. So I could suss out where the tower was, and it made me a little bit nervous going out at night on the wall with my some of the students from Ramallah. So we took a little caution, even though it's on the Palestinian side and lots of graffiti, etc., etc. But nonetheless, we didn't feel comfortable, so we went out at night. So this is us going out at night here, and here you can see in the background one figure that has gone up successfully. And it was actually quite exciting. It had a sort of certain frisson going out at night and spraying the wall with these life-size figures and having the automatic tower just behind us and all that. Then the next day, we would wake up, and the last of the residents of Ram would wake up, and they'd find these black figures starting to emerge, walking through the wall. We didn't want to have any writing with them or anything. We didn't want to alert Israelis even about the project, because Israelis didn't know I was doing this project. I always came in as a tourist. I pretended I was doing something else, and they never knew that I was doing the Nakba project. You can't really mention Nakba. Of course, in Israel, there's a big Nakba denial, and it's not permitted to be taught inside the Israeli institutions, etc. So there was always an element of risk with the whole project. Anyway, we managed to get 9 of these figures up on the wall in the end, not hundreds, and they are there to this day, of course. And they do look great. It would have been wonderful to have carried it out. That's me next one. So now the figures arrive for the first time. They've all been created through the series of workshops, and they've all been collected, and they're ready to go up for the first exhibition in Jerusalem. This is in May. These are a massive installation process, as you can imagine, because you're working with thousands of cables, and you've got to work out. Everything has been created according to a mathematical proportion, because I'm creating the illusion of heightened perspective. So tiny, tiny figures out at the back, large figures in the front, and everything gradually gets smaller by ½ centimeter. So it's all very carefully calculated, so you can imagine the installation is very tricky. This was the biggest shock for me and for everybody involved in this project, was to lay out the figures on the floor for the first time. Because when you see about 10 or 15 or 20, that's something, but when you see hundreds of them right across the floor, actually here there is the same number as upstairs, as about 2,700. So it's absolutely staggering to suddenly see them on the floor. And then here we're now setting them up. It's a much wider space here than here, shorter and wider. Here it's very long. This is the opening, and the opening was a very moving event because it was opened on the date that has been that was given to the Nakba, May the 15th, and this is the date that Israel celebrates the state of Israel. So you had this big clash of events, and it was very moving. And many of the Palestinians who came to it, they were physically moved to tears. And this, of course, was very strange for me as an artist to have created a work which is so cathartic, in fact. Yeah, here's slightly different shape from upstairs. It was always very important for me not to just have this here over in the Arab world, but more than anything else to target the West. And I had always in mind to take this to the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland, which is the biggest arts festival in the world, and to take it there because I knew that it would attract quite a lot of media attention, and then by using the media I would be able to get this word out Nakba, and I would be able to tell the story as far as I could to the media. And this now is the ongoing desire, is to get it into as many countries in the West as possible. So this is Edinburgh, it's the largest cultural gathering in the world. This is setting up in Edinburgh. Here we got much higher ceilings. Well, it's a 4-meter height drop, bigger space, and these are figures that were created in Lebanon. So here we got 3,400 figures. So this is actually a much larger installation than the one here.
Wasn't it hard transporting them?
Very.
With the strings and all?
Nightmare. Yes, completely. And that in fact has become, the whole project is a difficult project, and it is actually the transporting and the setting up, which is as much of the challenge as even the creation of the journey that I've taken. This is on the opening in Edinburgh. What was wonderful about Edinburgh was that it was extremely well received by local people, very well received, and it was a test because I was worried that out of context, people may not know very much about it. After all, in the West, all we know about Palestine are the situation in Gaza and terrorism, and very little else. And we don't know the marking of the history and what happened. So, but however, there's also a big a group of sympathizers in Britain as well, which must never be underestimated. And something else that's very surprising for me was that many Jews came to the exhibition and they said, I am Jewish, and also some who had families in Auschwitz and in these terrible concentration camps. And the support from them was also extraordinary. And that was a big surprise for me. I even had people saying that, we will try and help you to get this into London. I even had an American Jew who came over who said this is really essential, it goes to America, and maybe we can try and help you, whatever. So this was very heartwarming and very, very important. And I think it's very important to state that as well. This is the, here you can't quite see it again, it's a bit dark, but then you can see it's much, much higher rake and it's bigger volume. And here is already some of the press materials, and this is also very interesting because the media is making this, they're going with my journey that from the Holocaust to the Nakba. And this really makes the Zionists very angry because they don't want to have any kind of correlation with the Holocaust, and you can't possibly make any kind of comparison, and I'm not doing so. I'm making no comparison whatsoever. It's quite simply, it was my journey. I don't know why this is going off on its own. So, have I got it onto slideshow? I think it's went onto it. So anyway, there's just one quote here which I think is very important, and I think it's very important for you as artists. Here, this Duncan Macmillan has stated that the artist is only an enabler, an inspired enabler. Nevertheless, her own point of view is not what matters, only the truth of the story is enshrined in this remarkable work. And that is very important because I feel actually that I'm like a medium, and that now that the artwork is there, it's ready and it's presented, it is there to tell the story. It will tell the story better than I will, and that I'm just a kind of a go-between. And what I'm trying to do is to give a voice to people who are really disempowered, and especially in global media terms as well. And also what was very important in Edinburgh was that I spoke at the Edinburgh Book Festival with a very famous, one of the most not the most famous Israeli historian. He was one of the Ilan Pape, and I suggest that all of you actually, if you ever have a chance, that you read Ilan Pape, although in Jordan his books are not sold, because he's written something which is apparently it's not desired by the royal family against the Jordanians, but he should be read. He's absolutely hated in Israel. He's had to leave Israel because he's had so many threats to his life and to his family. But now he is going around the world and suggesting that everything Israeli should be boycotted, cultural boycott, education boycott, boycott of all products, because he feels that this is actually even worse than South African apartheid, and the only way that Israel will ever be able to face up to their crimes is in fact if there is a total boycott. It was the only thing that will make any reaction. And also with Raja Shahade, who's a wonderful Palestinian human rights lawyer and also writer. And I spoke at the Edinburgh Book Festival with both of them, and this was an extraordinary honour for me, as much as an honour to be here with Muna Hatoum, who I think is a very great artist. So something very great has come out of this whole journey for me too. So here we have, this was the Guardian newspaper, which is our main newspaper in Britain, and this got a centre page, a double page, which was absolutely brilliant actually. So what's great is that here is the UK media, which often tends to focus just on the terrorism aspect, and here, however, they have been talking about the Nakba. And this is really great, because for me then, this exhibition, it's working. I want to stop it here, even stop it from going on to its slideshow. And I'm going to, before we go into Lebanon, I'm just going to play a little film. It's just a short 5-minute film, hopefully. And do ask while we sort out the technology bit, which is always terrible.
It's just out of curiosity, so sorry for this question.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've seen both sides, you've interacted with both them, Israelis with the Holocaust, Palestinians with the Nakba. Why have you chosen the Palestinians? Have you chosen to defend or represent the Palestinians as a foreigner?
Okay, well, it's an interesting starting point. Well, first of all, I want to completely separate what happened in the Holocaust. I'm going to stand up for this.
As you said, it's a journey.
Yeah, it's a very important point, and it's great that you've raised the question. But I want to just make a total separation between what happened in the Holocaust, which is a European atrocity. What happened in the Holocaust is something that we did, and the reason why I went to this repeatedly to this camp was because I was trying to understand how is it possible that Europeans could possibly commit such a crime against humanity, which it was. It's one of the greatest crimes that's ever been committed. But it was European. And then, by chance on the journey, I started with the research and ended up discovering the Palestinian Nakba. And then when I discovered the Palestinian Nakba and started to read about it, I then found that there was this other terrible injustice. And the more that I read about it, the more compelling the history was, the more amazed I was by this injustice, this unresolved crime, this other unresolved crime of the 20th century that is not only being ignored, but perhaps is purposely being ignored. And then that swept me away. The Holocaust has happened, and in many respects, and the State of Israel was created out of all of that or whatever. But look at what happened to the Palestinians. Look at this incredible sacrifice, as though the Palestinians have become this sacrificial lamb in order for that. Now you can't impose one terrible atrocity following another atrocity. We can't do that in a civilized world, because otherwise, already of course there are so many wars that are created out of retribution and revenge, etc., but we can't do that. And it was only when I started to study this history that I began then to understand what is taking place in the Middle East today. So it's not just Palestine, of course. I mean, look, 2 years ago in Lebanon, etc., Jordan, everywhere. So this is like a terrible festering sore in the Middle East. Arguably, it's not an exaggeration to say that this could turn into the next Third World War, because we only need to see now the kind of dialogue that is being created and set up between Iran and between Israel. And that, of course, would turn very easily into a nuclear war. So we're talking about something here which, yes, the Palestinians are been sacrificed for this, but we're talking about something which is much, much greater. And I believe now, passionately, that until we address and understand and acknowledge what happened in 1948, and until the West acknowledges this, then we'll never ever be able to find a resolution. So it's a very major problem, in fact. And as a communicator, I'm not a politician and I'm not a writer, but I am a communicator as an artist, and so this is the only means that I have found to communicate this, what I believe is this terrible crisis. But it's a very important point that you brought up.
Do you want to introduce the DVD?
I just want to, this is Beirut, and this is the challenge of installation. And that's all I'm going to say for this short film. that into the story. Somebody just gave it to me from Beirut yesterday, so you're the first people to see it. And they just made it like a present, and I just think it's so great. So you're the first people to see it, and I think they should send it as a short, because I think it's a great little film, isn't it? It's great. Huh?
I think you should display it with the piece itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't you think?
We
It's
should,
great, budding story. Yeah, no, I think it's a really lovely piece.
Since you design each figure as an individual with a soul, do you sort of design a blueprint of how you're going to hang them as well? So do they go in specific places?
Well, they don't go in specific places exactly. I'm just going to show you one last image from Beirut. If I get
How
back
many
to that,
days
then
for
I'll-
that one?
that was 6 days, about 6 days, or was it 5 days? 5 days, I think it was actually, and about 12 people for sure. And then sometimes we were working right up to into the night. Here we've had the longest time. Here we've had 12 days, which has been amazing. I've never had that luxury. 12 days and on average of 8 people. And quite reasonable hours as well. So it was great to do. It was so relaxing to do it here. But
You have
it's
to
the first
take
time.
it down.
And don't talk to me about taking it down. No, don't. This is another. And here it's. Then there it's only up to under 3 weeks after all that work. Can you imagine? I just want to find the very, 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 very last images to show you how it was in Beirut, because it did look very spectacular in Beirut. And also, it's in a black stage, so it looks very different, and I think that's quite interesting. And now I'm not sure, maybe you can tell me, I'm not sure whether I go for black or for white, because wherever I go, I can ask them to make the room black, so I don't know if it looks best in black.
It's more dramatic.
It's more dramatic in black, isn't it? Yeah. And also, you can see very clearly the defined figure. And then I wonder, okay, is it too dramatic? Because it's an art installation, it's not a piece of theatre. So there's always this kind of question too, but...
So we can have a combination. Would be nice.
What, half black and half white?
Another combination and installation and theatre art.
Well, yeah, no, the matching of the two. Well, you're quite right. And also, as a theatre practitioner anyway, all of my techniques and things really are coming from theatre design. So it is a kind of merging. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the stage as well.
Hmm?
It's on the stage as well.
And this is on a stage as well, actually, there. This is why it's in this black box. Yeah, it is on a stage.
Are you going to exhibit this
This
in
is
other
here.
countries?
I hope so. Inshallah. Yeah, I hope so. This is here, of course. Now to the white, we've gone from the black
See,
into
yes.
the white. Yeah.
Now, I mean, each one has its own dramatic scene, but I think with the black, you
The
actually
contrast.
can see the
You can see
the contrast,
exactly.
You can see it better.
Yeah, maybe. I know, I think. Although there is something very beautiful, even the colours of the floor or whatever.
It's
but
a very
such a
different
beautiful
experience,
space, a
yes.
different experience, yeah. But I think so. The one thing is, though, is that you have to make up your mind before.
Yes, yes.
That's the
Yeah,
problem. So
amazing.
it's this terrible thing now of choice. What do I go for? I'm going to say black, or I'm going to go for white. It's just,
I
Yeah.
think that between heaven and earth is more displayed with white. But
it's
here-
more, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something more spiritual actually.
Yeah,
for
and
black
there's
and
something
white,
more
yeah.
sinister in this.
And there's something more sinister in
Yes.
black, exactly, yes, exactly.
So it all depends on, I mean, I find it difficult to decide, so I don't.
Exactly.
I know you will.
I was hoping
You
you
have
might.
the same
I thought,
problem.
just thought actually, as being design art students, you might be able to help a little bit there. So.
But because of the two specific, two different.
It's very different
Technically,
atmosphere.
having the contrast is more dramatic.
But then there's that spiritual aspect that you lose.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
I think you do lose it in the black. I think it's
Yes,
that
you do
exactly.
lose it.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic because white is about peace, and those people were.
Well, because you can like keep it white and play with lighting.
Yeah, even more so lighting. Because lighting, as you can imagine, that would be very difficult. Yeah. Yeah.
What about the figures? Did they color them, or this is just natural wax?
It's natural wax, and I did add a little bit of colour to some of them, so that you get the shades, the nuances
وفي
running
هلا
through
واحد
it.
عن أي
So that's why you get some which
أمريكا
are quite a dark colour and others a bit yeah, that's really nice, yeah.
أسعد.
Just to try and give that, because if they were all white, they would also do two ghostly images more.
You
You lose
lose
your
organization.
And there's the perspective aspect too. And also areas, you get these nice dips and shadows.
كمان welfare association كمان بعد.
Adds to the dramatic feeling.
Yeah.
And the
I did
individuality,
really interesting.
the individuality of every figure.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes, and of course that brings it out also, you've got the different tones. So right, so if anybody, let's open it over to you. I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to, I think it's a great opportunity for me to hear from you how you feel and also you've got any questions and whatever. Yeah, it is a very specific layout for the setup. That's done on a plan. Now I'm hoping to get funding to take it into a CAD program because what's happened, and it's very difficult, especially under the pressure of time when you're installing, and wherever you go there is this terrible pressure. And also, well in this case I literally sculpted in this space. This is another reason why I called it a sculpture, because I really do feel that this is the opportunity for me to sculpt with all of these elements in the given space and to recreate the odd oscillation here or a little line there, whatever. But you can imagine when you make those decisions, when you decide, okay, I want that bit there to go a little bit higher so I can have a hill coming down there, then you've got to then make sure that you're firing off the directions to people who are measuring up on the spot. And they get into a muddle, you get into a muddle. And also, when you've got, no matter how willing people are to do this, and some of them get paid, but not very much money, you can't muck around too much, especially with Palestinians. I mean, working with the Palestinians, they get very fed up if I start mucking around.
Yeah.
So, they get a little bit impatient with me. And it's like, oh, but you said this, I know I did, but it looks better, I'm sorry, it's a mistake. No, not only Palestinians, everybody gets really fed up by changing their mind. So what I really need to do is, of course, get it onto a program, 3D program, be able to play with it, work it out, and then could be very precise about lines, where they all go up, and in that way I can get much more precision. And then I can have a little play, because actually I like to be hands-on, of course I do. And the idea of taking just onto a computer program also is a little bit, I don't trust that, I want to have a bit of hands-on, but you've got to be quite organised.
Questions, comments?
It's great actually, it's really great. Then you use words. Visualizing ideas.
It's what?
And thank you for doing this.
Oh yeah, well thank you. I mean, thank you for attending, and also, it's been an extraordinary lifetime experience for me. A really extraordinary experience.
Because these figures, they're actually our grandparents and our parents.
Yes.
Kids, they're our parents.
Yes. Yes. absolutely, exactly, they are. And it's amazing how many older Palestinians have come to me and said, you know, this is extraordinary because this is either how I remember it or this is how I remember the stories because I was only a child at the time. So, you know, I might have been that child carried on the shoulders of that person or whatever. And it is, and then, you know, when people come to me and they say, gosh, this could have been me, then it is extraordinary for me as well. So as an artist and as an outsider, because I'm completely foreign in all of this, I'm discovering, day by day I'm discovering a story. So it started off with a book and films, and now every single day I'm discovering the story for real, even though we can't go back in time, but I'm discovering the story through grandparents, parents, the older generation of Palestinians.
So with time, with progress, do you think perhaps, and not to underplay, of course, you know, the Nakba and the continuation of it, but because as you said, current events are very much also connected to that. So we have this being replicated into, you're following the camps in Lebanon as well, but we also have various situations happening. This whole idea of migration and forced migration is currently happening in Iraq as well.
Yes.
Do you imagine or, you know, envision opening up to where it is, you know, multiple Nakbas?
Totally.
Yes.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a dream, actually, a fantasy, let's say, and everything I think. And again, you know, as young art students and whatever, and going on to be artist designers, the most important thing that you have, the most important time for you is at night and dreams, nighttime dreams and then daytime dreams. And you must never ever lose the opportunity of being able to dream, fantasize, see yourself somewhere and then go for it. That's the most important thing that you can do, is just dream. So I have this dream that one day, because there is the turbine hall in the Tate in London, which has got to be one of the biggest art spaces in the world. It was an old electricity, what was it? Electrical plant, exactly. And have you been there? Yeah, exactly. And it's extraordinary. And you have major artists presenting spectacular works, what you can call a spectacular work. And what I have this kind of dream about, and I'm going to put it forward as a proposal anyway, why not, is to actually create out of fiberglass life-size figures, getting smaller, right to a tiny 1 centimetre, throughout the entire turbine hall, so you would have thousands of figures. So you enter this vast space and you just see this, all around you, surround these figures. And of course they would never ever agree, probably, because the Zionist lobby is so powerful, to just representing just the Palestinian exodus. But then this would be for displacement. It would become a project for universal displacement. And if you all think about it, one of the great future, and it's already started, displacements is going to come from climate change. And already we have in the Pacific, we have islands which are on sea level, which are being submerged, and people are already on the move. They're talking now, that's Fiji, the entire inhabitants of Fiji are now going to be on the move. They're starting to find places for them because, of course, these places are going to be submerged. Bangladesh, with a population of absolutely millions, they are talking about all sea level cities across the world with vast populations are going to be submerged. So we are going to have vast populations on the move. So never mind through war or economy, this is going to be one of our major problems. So this is something that I want to open up and to address. So a refugee from many situations, and universal refugees, and of course we are all on the move as well, anyway, and have always been. But it is becoming even more critical, and especially for climate change. I mean, it's staggering how we are ignoring, because we have so many of these local wars, which are nothing compared to what's going to take place in the future for future generations. So yeah, so that's my dream. And that's where I'm going to put the proposal in quite soon. I'm not going to leave it for such a long time.
Do you have a contact with it?
To apply to you, do you? Then we've totally got to swap email addresses because I need every contact I can find. Yeah, no, I need contacts, absolutely. You know, because I'm coming from theatre, I don't really know the art world very well, and I don't have the contacts. If this was the theatre show, I know exactly where to place it, but in art, I don't know. So
we have a very sympathetic person in there, so that, you know.
then it
She would, she's not in the right department where you want your proposal to go, but she's
But
an
she
insider.
exactly. And also what I would love is for this project to go to a small room in the Tate.
Yes.
I mean, I would love it to be part of an exhibition in the Tate or whatever.
Yes.
So it is one of my places that I'm going to try and target.
Yes.
There's a possibility that the Catan, the new Catan space in London, are interested in this work, but in fact I don't want to take it into a space where I'm going to get an Arab audience, because there's no point.
Yes.
I want to take it, I want to find new audiences. I
Yes.
want to find people who know nothing about the Nakba. It's what I call wow factor art. It's you enter the room and you go, wow, what the hell is this? And that's good, because you've asked the question, and that's all I want, is people to ask questions about what happened to Palestine. So that's the aim of it.
There appears to be tea and coffee available outside.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
So
That's
we-
very nice.
Any more questions?
Someone must have voted
Anybody?
for us, I hope.
Well, we can continue outside as well as also.
Yes, if you have any questions,
questions,
this is
come
your
to me.
chance
Your
to
chance,
ask a
totally.
question.
Or outside.
Thank you, Jane, so much.
شكرا دكتورة تفضلت عليكم بس صدفة يعني جيت معكم
ولو
A couple of lads to help put the chairs back.
Yeah, that's great.
بالغرفة الثانية. هناك. عاملين hardware. تعرف يعني هاي this is a great opportunity انكم تشوفوا يعني تحضروا فنان وهي عملها موجود وعمل don't cause any accident. Heavy chair.
Very weighty chairs, absolutely. Well, yeah, get the youngsters do, don't they?
Yes.
I'm so used to being very hands-on that I'm